Colby stared into the lens like it could somehow stare back. His voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story. They didn't flicker, didn't search for the right words. They remembered. "This isn't a warning," he said slowly, like the words themselves might betray him. "It's a confession." He leaned forward, his breath ghosting across the microphone. The question no one ever asked, because no one wanted to ask it, isn't about what we found. Out there, it's about what they already knew about us. You're watching this because something inside you has been restless, an itch under your skin you couldn't name, a cold click behind your ribcage every time you look up at the night sky and feel, deep down, that something has been watching, back longer than we've existed to question it. But tonight, everything changes, and not because we saw lights in the sky or found metal on the moon. No, it's because of what happened in a diner parking lot outside Des Moines, Iowa. 2:43 a.m. A woman named Laurel Hensley, 38, mother of two, elementary school librarian, got out of her car, looked up at nothing in particular, and whispered something under her breath. No one else heard it. Not the trucker standing 15 feet away lighting a cigarette. Not the old man walking his dog down the sidewalk. But every radio, every Bluetooth speaker, every cell tower within a 50-mile radius broadcasted it, just once. A single, crisp female voice, identical in tone and cadence. He remembers what Earth did. Then she vanished. No security footage, no heat signature, no phone pings. Nothing but her keys still swinging in the ignition and a cup of coffee still hot on the dashboard. The file you're watching now didn't come from a leak. It wasn't smuggled or hacked. It showed up 2 hours after Laurel vanished, sitting in an encrypted archive labeled simply 40 DFX, Galactic Threat Assessment, Earth. Top-level clearance, sent to no one, addressed to nothing, but triggered by a keyword nobody's been able to trace: forgiveness. Colby hasn't blinked in over a minute. The hum of the server room around him is so quiet it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. They didn't name us a threat because we're violent, he continues, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. It's because we're the only species that forgets what it survives, and then does it again, and again, and again. He reaches into the folder beside him and pulls out a single photo, faded, yellowed at the edges. It's a child's birthday. Party, balloons, cake, smiling faces frozen in time. But in the background, barely visible through the window, is a figure standing completely still. Too tall, too thin, featureless. No one at the party remembered seeing it. But 3 people in that photo have died in the last 6 months. Each, when found with a phrase burned into their floorboards in char. He was warned. Colby looks directly into the camera one last time. They never feared our weapons, he says. They feared what we'd become if we ever learned what we are. And then, off-screen, a sound, not static, not interference. A soft, unmistakable voice calling from just outside frame. "Colby, it's Grandpa, come open the door." Colby hasn't had a grandfather in 17 years. The footage ends, or maybe it doesn't, because the screen doesn't go black. It just waits, and so do they. The screen didn't blink, it didn't fade out, it just held that moment. A man frozen, a voice calling from a past long dead, a promise that everything known was about to unravel. Colby's breath hitched somewhere, deep inside the quiet room, but no door opened. No footsteps approached. There was only silence, a silence so heavy it pressed against your skin like a cold, wet sheet, curling inside your chest where doubt and terror live. The voice, Grandpa, was a phantom lodged in the throat of memory, the ghost of a time so distant it felt like a dream you're not sure you had, but something inside you knows is true. A voice that shouldn't be here, speaking to a man who shouldn't be there, at a moment that shouldn't exist. The questions didn't come in flashes. They crept, crawling out from the corners of the mind where the light barely touches. Was Colby still in the server room? Or had he already slipped through a crack in reality no one else could see? Was this an intrusion from outside or inside? The camera lingered, And then, as if the silence was itself afraid of the truth, a new presence emerged. She stepped into the frame from the shadowed doorway. Claire, mid-30s, her eyes a murky storm, with a tremor in her hands like she'd been holding onto something terrible for far too long. Her smile was hesitant, cracked at the edges, and when she spoke, her voice was both familiar and unmoored. "Colby," she said, "you're scaring everyone. They're waiting, but you're not ready. Waiting for who?" Colby's lips moved, but no sound came. The camera caught a flicker, a glitch, the faintest distortion in Claire's voice, like a broken record skipping over a phrase only half remembered. "You don't understand," she whispered, stepping closer, but her eyes didn't meet his. They drifted past the lens, searching for something else, something lost. The room felt smaller, the walls tightening with every breath. Claire's presence should have grounded Colby, but instead it seeded doubt, like a soft rot in his bones. Was she real? Or a memory masquerading as flesh? She talked about files that didn't exist, about conversations no one else had, about warnings in places Colby's mind refused to access. "They don't want you to remember," she said, voice trembling, "because the truth behind what no one tells you is worse than forgetting." Colby blinked, trying to hold onto the frayed edges of his own reality. But his memories splintered, like cracked glass. Faces he should know slipped through his fingers. Conversations he swore they'd had were suddenly foreign. His reflection in the dusty window didn't look like him anymore. It was someone else, someone older, haunted. Somewhere behind his eyes, a quiet scream built, a knowledge too heavy to bear. A static hiss crackled from the speakers, a voice half buried in white noise. It was Laurel again, but different, distorted, fragmented. He remembers. No, he forgets, it said, then cut out. Rewinded, repeated. A loop that felt like a cruel joke, like the universe was mocking the very act of trying to remember. Colby reached for the remote, but the signals only grew stranger. Random bursts of laughter. A child crying in a language that twisted at the edges of English. And beneath it all, a whisper that threaded through every sound, every pause. They were never here. Claire moved to the monitor, fingers tracing a path across files that shifted when looked at too closely. Documents changed titles, images flickered between scenes from Colby's childhood and places he'd never visited. "You're breaking," she said, voice soft but urgent. "This isn't about a missing woman or some secret file. It's about you. About what you've been made to forget and what they don't want you to remember." Colby wanted to believe her, but the longer he looked, the more the lines blurred. Were these memories his or someone else's? Were these warnings or just fragments of a mind unraveling? He felt himself slipping, losing grip not just on what was real but on who he was beneath the weight of everything unsaid. The screen flickered again. A new clip appeared, grainy footage from an abandoned home. A little girl sat on the floor clutching a worn doll, whispering a name no one had spoken in years. The camera panned to the walls where the same phrase burned in shadow. He was warned. The girl looked up, eyes wide and knowing, and smiled. A smile that wasn't hers. Colby's hands trembled, reaching for something solid, anything to hold on to. Claire's voice came from behind, softer now, almost a lullaby. "Maybe the real unsolved mystery isn't out there in the stars," she said. "Maybe it's the truth behind what no one tells you, what's been living inside us all along." And in that moment, with the weight of the unknown pressing down, Colby realized the most terrifying question wasn't what had vanished or who was watching. It was whether any of this had ever been real at all. Or if, like him, the world was slowly unraveling into a place where memory, identity, and truth were nothing but fragile illusions, waiting to break. Then, just as the screen cracked into static, the voice returned, clear, unyielding, not his grandfather's, but something older, something colder. "You remember now, but it's too late." And somewhere behind the door that never opened, something answered. The hum of the server room had become a steady pulse in Colby's veins, the only rhythm grounding him, as he dug deeper into the folders labeled with cryptic codes and timestamps that never matched the reality outside his door. Every file was a breadcrumb leading through a forest dense with shadows. But finally, the trail seemed to open. The pieces, painstakingly collected, began to fit. Not perfectly, but enough to sketch a shape out of the chaos. There was a pattern here, a truth, buried beneath the layers of erased memories and fractured voices. He held on to it like a lifeline because, for the first time in days, he felt the dizzying pull of hope. The breakthrough came from a small, overlooked clip, grainy footage from a hidden security camera in a forgotten town hall on the outskirts of Wichita, Kansas. The timestamp read 2003, a year he should have remembered clearly. But something in his mind folded away, locked behind a door he hadn't found the key for. The footage showed a town meeting. People gathered under fluorescent lights, murmuring, anxiously. A man stood at the front, face obscured by shadow but voice unmistakable. Calm, commanding, almost hypnotic. He spoke of containment, dangers beyond understanding, and a necessary silence. The crowd nodded, some with relief, others with dread. But no one left the room before agreeing to the terms laid out. The word Earth slipped from the man's lips like a verdict. Colby watched, breath shallow, as the camera lingered on a woman, clutching a child, a girl with wide eyes that mirrored his own. The same girl from the abandoned house, the one whispering names no one wanted to say aloud. He felt the cold grip of déjà vu tighten, like he was standing on the edge of something that was supposed to be familiar, but had been deliberately buried beneath decades of lies. This was it, the hidden truth that had been clawing at his mind. The silence wasn't an accident, it was orchestrated. The memory glitch that had stolen pieces of his past was a deliberate erasure, a censorship imposed to protect something. Darker than any weapon, he reached for the folder marked Project Obsidian, the only file that had remained encrypted until now. The screen flickered, then opened to reveal pages of classified documents, hand-scrawled notes, and diagrams of biological subjects that defied conventional science. Names of researchers long dead mingled with anonymous entries, descriptions of phenomena that blurred the line between science and superstition. A single sentence, repeated in different forms, etched itself into his mind. They watch from the shadows where light cannot reach. They are patient. Colby's fingers trembled as he connected the dots between the woman's whispered name, the vanished librarian, and the mysterious broadcasts that had scrambled his senses. The danger was not external. It was embedded, woven into the very fabric of what he was, what they had made him forget. He thought of Laurel, vanished without a trace, of the girl in the footage, echoing a terror too old to name, of the voices that whispered through static and memory. The pattern was unmistakable. The past wasn't just repeating, it was bleeding into the present. But just as the pieces aligned, the false resolution tightened around him like a noose. A detail so small it almost slipped past. The timestamp on the footage, 2003, didn't match the memories he had of that year. Because he remembered being somewhere else, someplace safe, a home filled with light and laughter, a family that never whispered about shadows or secrets. The contradiction gnawed at his certainty. Why? Couldn't he remember that meeting? Why did his own history fracture at the edges? The answer came not from the files, but from a chilling sensation crawling up his spine. The unmistakable feeling of being watched, not by someone tangible, but by something that seeped into his mind like a cold draft beneath a locked door. It was an ancient presence, patient and unyielding, observing the fractures in his psyche and waiting for him to slip. A force that had been here from the beginning, threading through his memories and erasing what it needed to keep itself hidden. It wasn't just external. It was inside, a psychological prison disguised as reality. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He hesitated before opening it. The screen lit up with a single phrase. "You're not crazy. They lied. To you." And then a video attachment played, showing a young boy, himself, sitting alone in a dark room, whispering the same name Laurel had uttered, the same name the girl in the footage had breathed like a secret spell. His own voice, but hollow, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The scene cut abruptly, replaced by a flash of an old photograph showing a group of people smiling beneath a banner that read, Community Safety Initiative 1999. Familiar faces stared back, but one was conspicuously blurred. The man from Sium, the meeting, the one whose face had been hidden in shadow. Colby's world fractured again, the edges of his reality crumbling into dust. The memory glitch was not a malfunction. It was a mechanism, a defense, a lie constructed to keep the truth at bay. And now, staring into the void of what should have been his own history, he realized the story he thought he was uncovering was a carefully constructed illusion, a staged revelation meant to mislead. The true mystery wasn't about lost people or forgotten meetings. It was about the orchestrated forgetting itself, the endless cycle of denial and erasure. The screen flickered once more, the video glitching and rewinding in a loop that felt both maddening and deliberate. And then, almost imperceptibly, a shadow passed across the room behind him, unseen by the camera but felt deep in his bones, a cold breath on the back of his neck. Something ancient, something unnameable, something that had watched every whispered secret, every stolen memory, every fractured mind from the beginning, waiting patiently for him to believe he had found the mystery uncovered, only to realize he had walked right into the heart of a deeper, darker silence. And in that silence, the truth waited, patient and indifferent. The video cut to black, and, somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "Watch again." Colby wasn't alone. That truth hit him like a cold wave, sudden and all-consuming, the way a whispered warning carves through the thickest silence. For every fractured memory he chased, every glitch in the endless static, there were others. People like him, caught in the same web of shadowed recollections and silent erasures, all tethered to a deeper, unseen network. They were watching, too, not just as passive witnesses, but as participants in a game that had been rigged long before any of them understood the rules. The moments when he thought he was alone with his unraveling mind, were the moments when others silently leaned closer, piecing together shards of a truth that no one was supposed to share. The first indication came not through files or voices, but through the pattern of symbols that started appearing in places he never thought to look. A scrawled sigil on the back of a forgotten book in a library far from Wichita. A strange geometric mark painted onto a crumbling wall behind an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of Des Moines. Messages, cryptic and fragmented, barely visible but pulsing with a significance that thrummed beneath the surface of conscious thought. Colby found himself drawn to them, feeling an impossible connection, like the symbols were breadcrumbs left not just for him, but for anyone who was brave enough to see beyond the veil. The symbols weren't random. They were a language of warning, a hidden code that only those fractured by the same hidden truth could decode. In the quiet hours when sleep slipped away, Colby began to share dreams, not his own alone, but overlapping. Visions that unfolded like scenes from a found footage reel too real to dismiss. In one dream, a vast room filled with blinking screens and maps scrolling names and dates. In another, a shadowed figure spoke without words, its presence folding into the edges of his mind like smoke. When he awoke, the images lingered, half-remembered and weighted with dread, as though they were messages from others who were trapped in the same silent network. These weren't just dreams. They were shared experiences, a collective memory, glitch where reality fractured and folded back on itself, revealing cracks in the foundation of identity itself. And then the messages began to arrive. Encrypted texts, lines of code hidden within static-laden videos posted on obscure forums, brief radio bursts that flickered across open channels late at night, all containing fragments of what the government never released. A voice bleeding through the noise murmuring, "You were right all along." A confirmation that the doubts, the paranoia, the gut-wrenching feeling that the world was lying were not delusions, but warnings shouted from the void. The more Colby tried to grasp the full picture, the more the edges dissolved, leaving only questions about what it meant to be human when your memories could be rewritten and your identity shaped by forces unseen. In the midst of this growing storm, a third perspective emerged, one that didn't come from the fractured minds caught in the web, but from an observer who seemed detached, distant, yet disturbingly present. This observer was neither fully seen nor heard directly, but communicated through cryptic transmissions embedded within the chaos, a soft voice layered beneath the static of an old broadcast, a figure silhouetted against the glow of a forgotten monitor, always watching, always waiting. Unlike the fragmented truths and half-remembered nightmares shared by others, this observer spoke with a clarity that cut through the confusion, offering pieces of a puzzle that suggested control not as a concept, but as a living entity. Something that shaped memories, identities, even realities. The observer's messages were unsettling, intimate whispers that turned the mirror inward. "You are not who you think you are," the voice would say, or, "Memory is the first battlefield." These words felt less like advice and more like prophecy, pressing against the fragile certainty Colby and the others clung to. What was the boundary between self and control? Between memory and fabrication? The observer hinted at a deeper game, a force that had watched from the shadows since the beginning, manipulating not just what was remembered, but what could ever be known. As layers peeled back, the conspiracy unfolded not as a simple secret, but as a sprawling labyrinth where every revelation led to a new question, and every answer warped the reality it tried to explain. Colby's sense of self splintered further, haunted by the possibility that his memories were not his own, that his mind was a vessel for something far larger and far darker than any secret government program or classified file. He was a fragment of a greater whole, connected to others who might be strangers or reflections of himself, all caught in the same unseen network that had woven itself through their lives like a silent infection. The weight of it pressed on him. Now, the suffocating truth that to know the whole story might mean losing what was left of his humanity. The symbols, the dreams, the cryptic transmissions. They were not just warnings, but a call to arms and surrender at once, a siren song beckoning deeper into the unknown. There was no map, only the shadows waiting to consume the path behind him once he moved forward. And just when the thread seemed to pull taut enough to unravel everything, the screen flickered, a final message flashing before the signal cut out. "You're not alone, but some watches never blink." Colby stared into the void, the weight of all those unseen eyes settling like ash around him, knowing that this story, the story he thought was his alone, was far from over. The line between observer and participant had blurred, and now the question wasn't just what was real or false, but what it meant to exist in a world where every memory, every identity, was a battleground for forces that had never stopped watching. The screen went dark, but the feeling lingered, heavy, alive, and waiting. Colby sat alone in the dim light of his cluttered apartment, the glow of the screens flickering around him like ghosts trapped in glass. The weight of everything, the fractured memories, the cryptic symbols, the whispered warnings, settled heavy in his chest, pressing down with a relentless, suffocating force. But now the question wasn't what had happened, or even who had been watching all along. It was why. Why had this hidden reality been crafted layer upon layer in the shadows of his mind and the minds of others like him? What did it mean, not just for the truth, but for what it meant to be human at all? He realized then that the story he'd been chasing was never about uncovering secrets or unmasking conspiracies. It was about confronting the very nature of existence. How fragile identity is when memory itself can be bent, erased, or rewritten. The why was a mirror held up to the soul, reflecting not just the manipulation of forces beyond comprehension, but the fundamental fear and yearning that define human life. The desperate need to belong, to be seen, to hold on to something real. In a world slipping into uncertainty, Colby's hands trembled as he scrolled through the latest file. an unmarked video, grainy and raw, but unbearably intimate. It showed a younger version of himself, eyes wide with confusion and fear, speaking into a camera with a voice breaking under the weight of unspeakable truth. "I remember," he whispered, tears streaking down his face. "But remembering feels like falling apart. What if the truth isn't salvation but the thing that destroys us?" His breath caught, the rawness of the moment cutting deeper than any mystery or revelation. It wasn't the secrets that haunted him. It was the vulnerability of knowing them. The unbearable loneliness of carrying a truth no one else could understand without breaking. The past was not just a puzzle to solve, but a wound reopening, exposing raw nerve endings that pulsed with pain and hope. Claire's voice echoed softly from a recording, fragile and full of tremors. "We chose to forget because the weight was too much, but forgetting was also a betrayal to ourselves and to the very essence of who we are." The confession hung in the air like a prayer and a curse. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of all the moments lost, the love forgotten, the betrayals buried beneath layers of manipulated memory. Colby's eyes blurred as he faced a choice no one had prepared him for: to keep chasing the fractured shards of reality and risk losing himself in the endless labyrinth of doubt and fear, or to surrender to the darkness, to the silence that promised peace but demanded oblivion. Was truth a weapon or a balm? Could the horror of what had been done to them be the very thing that might save what remained of their humanity? The room seemed to breathe with him, the screens flickering like the pulse of a restless mind. And then, in the quiet between heartbeats, he understood. This was no longer a story about conspiracies or government cover-ups. It was the terrifying awakening to a world where memory and identity were fluid, where the very act of knowing could be both a prison and a liberation. He reached out, fingers brushing the cool surface of the monitor, a silent plea for clarity in the swirling fog of existence. The voice that had whispered through static and dreams spoke again, softer now, a haunting echo. To know the truth is to stand naked before the void, but in that vulnerability lies the only chance to be truly free. Colby closed his eyes, feeling the fragile line between reality and illusion thin, until it almost disappeared. The story, the mystery, was far from over. It was a waking dream, a fractured reflection of the human soul itself, endlessly searching for light in the shadows. And as the screen faded to black, the final words appeared. Slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.